If you believe that the harder you train and the more frequently you train, the faster your muscles will grow, then what I am about to tell you in the next 5 minutes is going to fundamentally change the way you think about every rest day, every sleep cycle, and every moment you spend outside the gym. Because the truth about muscle recovery is almost the complete opposite of what the grind culture of the fitness industry has been selling you, and understanding the actual biology of what happens to your muscle between sessions is not just academically interesting, it is the single most practical piece of knowledge you can have, because it determines whether the training you are doing is building you up or systematically breaking you down without you even realizing it. The first truth that almost nobody in fitness content discusses honestly is that muscle growth does not happen in the gym. It happens outside the gym. And this is not a motivational phrase. It is a precise description of the cellular biology of hypertrophy. When you train with sufficient intensity and volume, you create microscopic damage to the sarcomeres, the contractile units within your muscle fibers, and you generate metabolic stress and mechanical tension that collectively trigger a cascade of intracellular signaling, beginning with the activation of a protein kinase called mTORC1, which is the master regulator of muscle protein synthesis, and this signaling cascade initiates the production of new contractile proteins actin and myosin that are added to the damaged muscle fibers, making them thicker and stronger. But this entire process, the activation of satellite cells, the inflammatory repair response, the protein synthesis, the structural remodeling, occurs exclusively during rest, not during training. And research from the University of Stirling by Kevin Tipton and colleagues on post-exercise muscle protein synthesis shows that the synthesis rate remains elevated for 24 to 48 hours after a training session, but requires adequate substrate in the form of amino acids from dietary protein and adequate hormonal conditions driven by sleep and low stress to proceed at maximum efficiency, meaning if your recovery environment is poor, if your sleep is inadequate, your protein intake is insufficient, or your stress is chronically elevated, the training signal you generated in the gym is being wasted because the biological machinery required to convert that signal into new muscle tissue is not operational. The second truth is about sleep specifically, and the research here is more important than almost any training variable you will ever optimize. During deep, slow-wave sleep, your pituitary gland releases the majority of your daily growth hormone output in a series of pulses. And growth hormone is not just a recovery hormone in the general sense. It is a specific driver of satellite cell activation, collagen synthesis in connective tissue, and the IGF-1 signaling pathway that directly stimulates muscle protein synthesis, meaning the quality and duration of your sleep is not a lifestyle preference that exists separately from your training results. It is a primary anabolic variable that determines how much of your training stimulus is converted into actual muscle tissue. A study from the University of Chicago showed that subjects sleeping 5.5 hours per night lost 60% less muscle during a caloric deficit compared to those sleeping 8.5 hours. And while that study used a deficit context, the underlying hormonal mechanism applies universally. Poor sleep reduces growth hormone output, elevates cortisol, which is catabolic to muscle tissue, impairs insulin sensitivity, which reduces glucose uptake into muscle cells, and decreases testosterone production, collectively creating a hormonal environment that is almost perfectly designed to prevent the muscle growth your training was trying to stimulate. And no amount of protein, supplements, or training optimization can compensate for a hormonal environment that sleep deprivation has systematically dismantled. The third truth about muscle recovery is the concept of supercompensation, which is the physiological principle that explains why rest is not the absence of progress, but is in fact the mechanism of progress itself. When your body is exposed to a training stress that exceeds its current capacity, it does not simply repair back to the level it was at before the training session, it overcompensates, rebuilding the damaged structures to a slightly higher level of capacity than existed before the stress was applied, because your body is anticipating that the same stress will be encountered again and is preparing a more capable system to handle it. And this overcompensation is the literal biological definition of getting stronger and bigger. But it only occurs if the recovery period between training sessions is sufficient for the repair and overcompensation cycle to complete. If you retrain the same muscle before it has fully recovered and supercompensated, you are applying a new stress to a system that has not finished responding to the last one, which interrupts the supercompensation cycle, prevents the overshoot above baseline that represents genuine adaptation, and over time produces a state called functional overreaching, or, in severe cases, overtraining syndrome, characterized by declining performance, persistent fatigue, mood disturbances, and the complete cessation of hypertrophic progress despite continued training effort. Research on training frequency and recovery by Dr. Mike Israetel on maximum recoverable volume establishes that there is a specific range of training volume for each muscle group, a minimum effective dose below which insufficient stimulus is applied, a maximum adaptive volume above which recovery cannot keep pace with damage, and a maximum recoverable volume above which the damage being accumulated exceeds the body's capacity to repair between sessions. And the practical implication is that more training is only better up to the point where recovery can match it, after which more training actively subtracts from your results rather than adding to them. The complete truth about muscle recovery is this: train with sufficient intensity and volume to trigger the hypertrophic signaling cascade, then protect the recovery window as aggressively as you protect the training session itself by sleeping 7 to 9 hours as a non-negotiable biological requirement, consuming 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight to provide the amino acid substrate that muscle protein synthesis requires. Managing psychological stress because cortisol directly competes with testosterone and growth hormone for receptor binding, and chronically elevated cortisol creates a catabolic environment that dismantles the muscle your training is trying to build. And spacing your training sessions for each muscle group with sufficient recovery time, typically 48 to 72 hours, to allow the supercompensation cycle to complete before the next training stimulus is applied. Because the athlete who trains with this understanding does not just work harder than everyone else, they recover better, and in the biology of muscle growth, recovering better is the same thing as growing faster.